Good evening, YouTubers, and welcome to episode 7 of Shrigleytube TV. In tonight's show, we've got a little bit of dyno session with a very standard road-going imp sport spec 930. Just thought I'd put it in because I've never done anything like that before. Just doing a very chilled sort of 60 foot-pound of torque, but it'd be a nice road engine. And then moving on from there, we got a friend called in with I forgot what it's called now. It looks like a TR7. Anyway, you'll see it. It's a Lancia Stratos, so it's a replica car, but beautifully done. You'll really like it. I really liked it. So he's did a little bit of a walk around, and that was quite interesting. And then the best bit is, hopefully for you guys, is I did some work on the bottom end of the 5 bearing, the 135 horsepower, the proper big race engine we're doing. So the crank arrived and I had to sort out the rod length and stuff like that. So I did a bit of a talk on that. Hopefully didn't get too involved, kept it all nice and simple. Hope you enjoy. Thanks for subscribers. And what I also wanted to say was thank you for all the people that have come and contacted me regarding the deep angle head and the 5 bearing block. I've had a siege of phone calls. All old boys from back in the day who remember all this, and the stories are crazy. There was basically 10 of them 5 bearing blocks, and apparently there was 10 heads as well. And Root's competition department were looking at doing a 998 long rodded 5 bearing imp for the imp engine to go in their rally cars and to go into production as well. And they axed it, and all of the work they'd done on these 10 engines, some of them got destroyed in testing. Apparently, now whether it's true or not, it'll end up in a skip, and then it got pulled out and saved, and that's where these engines came about. And luckily they went to Ian Carter, some of them, and some of them went to Alan Fraser Engineering, and then they were developed from there. But that's just a rough sort of gauge on what information I've took off people. You know, it could be a little bit inaccurate in case you're watching this and you know different, you know. Anyway, I'll stop waffling, crack on with what we're up to, and I'll see you next week. Okay, YouTubers, we're on a dyno with the 930 road going spec engine, which is it's just a 930, or I said imp engine, bored to 930cc with a oil drain head on it, which is what we know as an L4 head, and a 533 casting. And it's had the valves opened up to take the valve seats opened up to take the imp sport valves and the bronze guides with the seals, so it keeps the oil consumption under control, etc. I just thought I'd load it up. It's a bit boring compared to what we're normally dynoing, but you get the gist. It's doing a lovely sort of steady 60 foot-pound of torque at 4.5, which I believe dead rock steady. I believe is about 10 foot-pound up on standard, so that's coming from its extra capacity, that going from 875 to 930cc, so it'll be a nice drive in this chap's car. Right, YouTubers, a bit tame this compared to the usual engines we have on the dyno, but I thought we'd do a little chat on it. This is the engine that, if you saw last week's episode, you'd have noticed we skimmed the block and cleaned the galleries out and made a point about that. This week it's on the dyno running. Just to give you a rundown of the spec, it's an imp engine. Now this is the way a lot of my work is going. I did just want to do purely race engines, but you can't turn work away, and it's got to a stage now where people are spending money on standard road engines. So with the Hillman, what I find is if you get a worn out imp 875, it's a really good stage to make them improvement is to make them a 930cc. So I put the 70mm pistons in them, bore them, machine the block, etc. head, and then this head is what we call an L4 head, and it has a small valve in it, but it has a big seat. So what I do is I open the seat out to take the imp sport valve. It's a much cheaper way of doing it because the imp sport heads are so expensive to start with now. And finding a good one is becoming quite hard, whereas these heads are quite plentiful, and it has the oil drain. Not that I use it, because if you look around here you'll see the drain has a bung in it, as does the block. And the reason for that is on the bronze guides that I fit, or they're actually Colsibro, I fit a valve guard oil seal, and the road going gang love them because it stops the engine from consuming oil. So you just literally do your 6,000 miles and change the oil, and it shouldn't use any. Now, obviously you're going to see the video of running it. It does about 60 foot-pound of torque, which is a nice improvement over standard, and runs a head gasket. I love the Imp Sport cam thing. It's an absolutely brilliant road cam. I use it in all my road engines because anything else is just a little bit too peaky, especially when you start at traffic lights. So, oh, just noticed we've got an oil leak there. That's not very good, is it? It's coming out of the dipstick tube. Just sort that out. So yeah, this is where we are, and a little video about the 930 Sport Spec engine. Right, chaps, it's Monday morning, and I was supposed to be getting with some work, and then Bergerac knocked on my door and said there's something outside you need to look at. So we've just come outside to see this. This is Big Norm's bride.
I think it's the car he's meant for look at, not me.
Not you, Norm, no. Norm, can we have a peep at the engine?
Yeah, go on.
It's a bit of a masterpiece, this. It's got like a V6. Is it? You say it was a Toyota engine?
Yeah, it's the one out of a Lotus Exige, yes.
Lotus Exige. And part of the reason we're doing this little bit of a clip is because Norm's selling this. So if you want the phone number, just give me an email and I'll pass it along to you. But yeah, oh, and it's got a supercharger as well. How many horsepower, mate?
390, near damn it, getting up for 400.
Wow. Does it do wheelies?
I've never had the front end up in the air yet.
Can we do a wheelie for the channel?
The wall,
just reverse out on the road, limiter, and then sidestep the clutch.
I'll fire it up.
Oh, can we hear it?
Yeah.
Great. Don't be shy. Where's the limiter? 7.5, 8. Oh mate, that's awesome. Look at that. What a cockpit. How much is it?
120, 125, you know.
Yeah. It's probably out of my price range at the moment, but I am interested, yeah?
What, are you down to your last 4 million?
Something like that, yeah, yeah.
But it's practically new.
Last four something.
It was built as a brand new car. There's
what year is it then? Is it
March 2022?
Oh, so it is literally a brand new car.
New, yeah.
It's on a private registration number.
Yeah, just myself. Yeah, I've done about 7,000 miles in it.
Wicked. Well, thanks for showing us around.
Not a problem.
If anyone's interested, send me an email and I'll pass your number along. Good evening, YouTubers. Welcome back to the channel. Just my favourite part of the show now, where we talk about this engine, or a race engine rather than a road going engine. So this is the brand new 5-bearing bottom end with the brand new 5-bearing steel crank. I've got to do the rods. We're going to go through that together in a minute. Got the pistons. Just to recap, in case you've not seen previous videos, this is the engine that the chap wants to race in 2024. 135 horsepower, that's the target figure. 10,000 RPM, which I think is the amount of bangs per minute we'll need to do to get that sort of horsepower out of a 2-valve banger like this, an old banger. And yeah, we're going to talk tonight about getting the rods made, so that's something I'm going to go into a bit more detail in a minute. I've done some workings out that I'm going to go through with you. Now, what's happening with this engine next is, I don't mind gluing it all together, but I'll be honest, the best man for the job for doing, we're going to put like a dry sump system on it, etc., is a chap down south called Stuart Brownsie, Rodwell Motorsport. He's the best thing that we're going to get to like an Ian Carter reincarnation, because he's really good, this Stuart. He loves making swarf. He'll make a beautiful sump for this. It'll all be one piece with all the bridges from the mains. It'll be far better than anything I could produce. So we're going to ship the engine down to him. He's going to do his part. In the meantime, I'll get the rods made and crack on with the head. So when it all comes back in the new year, we'll be able to get it all put together and ready to run for 2024. So I'll take the camera off the stand now and we'll talk a little bit about the rod ratio and how we've come about it. Okay, so we're just having a quick look at the engine first, and this is the 5-bearing knife edge crank, all super polished, beautiful bit of steel. That I'm sure that looks to me like it's going to be capable of running to 10,000 RPM, no problem. It's got cross drillings both ways back to the intermediate bearings, which is handy because I've just seen something that I'm quite alarmed about. If we take the bearing shells out of the engine and look, you'll see the issue that may concern some of you guys as well. Basically, it's only fed to bearing journals 1, 2 and 3, sorry, 1, 3 and 5. So we've got the oil feed from the main gallery there, there and there. So I'm assuming the oil has to come into the crankshaft to the big end and then back against centrifugal force to lubricate this intermediate bearing, which is a proper no-no in my book, but it's obviously worked. So, but what I propose to do is, I've just been looking and I've realised there's the main gallery there, and obviously this is too thin here. That's why they've not drilled down, because obviously because the imp's a pair of liners and then a big gap in the middle. We've got enough land for the hole to go straight down to the gallery and across, but we haven't underneath here. It's really thin. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to come in at an angle like this into there, straight through all the way to the gallery, and it'll be one chance to get it right. So we're probably going to need to set up on a dummy block and make sure we get the angle absolutely crack on so that the hole lines up with the mains gallery. So I am going to put extra oil feeds in this. I couldn't, it may have worked in the past, but there's no way I could cope with that. That would blow my mind now. So that's the first part of it. And then the second part is, I want to talk about, this is the liner, which I don't like, but there's probably nothing wrong with it. It's just me being fussy. There's the mains caps. We're going to put bridges from those and bridge them all to the bottom end, so it's all really like compounded like a laminate, all nice and strong. Now, what I was going to talk about first was the rod length. So I'm just going to put the phone down and come straight back to you. Right, okay, the first thing we're going to go into is the rod length. Now, the rod length, I have talked about it in the past, and we'll just be clear, the rod length has nothing to do with the capacity or the stroke or anything like that. It's just purely to do with the dynamics of the engine. So the way that the engine goes round, it changes the way that the angles, should we say. So if you can imagine, this is a standard imp rod and this is my long rod. So if you can see the difference in length there. So on the short rod, we get much bigger angles on the crank at any given point, and on long rod we get lesser angles. So the longer rod suits a higher revving engine. There's loads of reasons for it. They say that there's less friction on the side load on the piston. You get better piston wear. You can run a skinnier piston with a longer rod, all to do with the reduction in angle. But the most important thing, I think, is that it slows the piston down on its deceleration towards top dead center, and it also slows it down on its acceleration. So it's just to do with the way it passes over top dead center. If we can get the piston to decelerate and accelerate slower away from top dead center, the main effect of this is we stop the piston from out accelerating the flame front. If you think the flame speed is constant no matter what you do, it's set by the compression ratio, etc. So we've got a burn speed. That flame front, it will burn at a set speed. There is nothing we can do to change it, apart from, like, say if it gets too hot, then obviously it can go so fast that it goes into detonation, but we're not going to touch on that. We'll just pretend that it's a set speed. So if we can slow the piston down, we can make it so that the piston can absorb more of the energy from that expansion of gases, from that burn. And that is what we're looking for, because the faster it goes, the more bangs per minute we can make it do and produce power, the more power we'll get, because it's all about the amount of bangs in the cycle, the amount of times, the amount of energy you can harness from each of those bangs. So we might only get, I don't know, 30% energy from each bang, but if we're doing it 10,000 times a minute, it's 30% of a lot of bangs. So, you know, we get a lot of energy, and that's your work done. That is your horsepower, and that's what we're chasing when we're messing with race engines. So I'm going a bit into that there. Let's just try and keep it simple. So rod length's dead important. That's a standard imp. That's my long rodded imp from the past. This is out of a mini engine. Got the offset journal on it. And you can see the guys that build mini engines, they've obviously all understood this a long time ago. I mean, it's all over the internet. It's not rocket science. But you can see That's got some serious rod length in it, so that will have had really nice dynamics. Now, moving on, what I've done is I've written down here some figures to talk about. So this is in the past, this is a standard imp. So a standard imp with a 60mm stroke crank, and the standard rod length is 1.7, which isn't a bad figure. I like 2:1. That's my favourite figure. Now, of all the engines I've ever done, the 2:1 or 1.98:1 in my 998 long rod, which is standard throw crank with the longer rod, the one we just seen. That engine, horsepower for capacity, was really good. I really like that, and the way it hangs on, it just wants to carry on going. It doesn't fall off at all. And then we did the long rod, which is obviously the long rod did 1150, which had 10mm stroke on it, or 9mm stroke. So that was 69.5 stroke, 1150, and that ends up back down lower than standard. It ends up at 1.72:1, and that engine works really well. It's a good torquey engine, but I'd love it to hang on like the 998. And then this one's just one to throw in the mix. This is the 1200 short rod. The viewers that have watched all my videos will remember the short rod engine we did, the Stealth 1200. Now that was a road car engine, so the short rod angle gave us loads of bottom end torque, which is what we wanted because it was a bottom end torque engine. It wasn't a racer. So that's got a real low ratio of 1.5:1. Now, interestingly, and I'm not going to go into this too much, but rod to stroke ratio is really important on stuff like an old 2-valve engine where the plug isn't in the ideal position, etc., and the burn speed isn't brilliant. But on a modern 16-valve engine, you can run a much shorter rod and it just doesn't affect them. They can just carry on producing power at top end. Quite why I don't fully understand, but I suspect it's to do with the efficiency of the combustion chamber, etc., and the way it burns better, so it doesn't need to be as, you know, have the piston hanging around for as long. Anyway, the new engine, which is the one here that we're looking at, this engine, it has a stroke of 66.8, which is slightly shorter than mine, because the way they've come about their 1150 is they've done their 1150 on a bigger pot. So they're using a 74mm bore, so they have to use a shorter stroke crank. I was using a 72.5mm bore. So 66.8, 1150 long rod, or XLR, it's extra long rod. And we've got this ratio at 2:1. Now the way we've come about this is my little diagram here. So I just wrote some facts down. So a stroke 66.8, bore 74, and the capacity is 1149.2 cc's. So this is our block. So from the centre line of the crankshaft to the top of the deck, I've got 176mm. And then what I need to do to work out the rod length in this standard height block, which I'll come to in a minute, the relevance of this, is I need to work out half of the crankshaft throw. So half the stroke is 33.4mm. And then I need to work out the compression height. Now the compression height is from the centre line of the little end pin to the top deck of the piston. So just from the centre of this hole to the face of your squish band area on top of the piston, and that is 23.5 on this piston. So I add these two figures together and that gives me 56.9. If I take the 56.9 and take it off the overall height, that'll give me that distance. That's my rod centers. So 56.9 minus 176, so it's half the stroke and the compression height added together give us 56.9 minus the overall height, which is BH block height, equals 119.1, which gives us a rod length as it is, which 119, I've worked it out, 119.1 divided by the stroke equals 1.78. So that puts it slightly better than standard and slightly better than my original 1150, but nowhere near where I want to be. So I want to get this thing to run a 2:1 rod to stroke ratio. So I've written down here my ideal rod to stroke ratio is 2:1. So it'd be 66.8, which is the stroke, multiplied by 2, that gives us 2:1. So I need a rod length of 133.6mm. Now the actual rod length is 119.1 in the height for that block. So that's the rod block that I'd have to make for it at the moment.
and the desired one would be, we rounded up to 134. So I need an extra block height of 14.5 millimeters. So that's pretty ideal for me, because I don't like the way this has been done. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, don't get me wrong. It's got some real fancy liners, and these sit in here, and they index on one side. I'm not sure whether the casting has shrunk there or whatever, but it's immaterial now, because what I propose to do is I'm going to get a CNC plate made, or maybe laser water jet cut, 15 millimeters, we'll say, a plate. I'm going to bolt this plate to the top of the engine, and then what I'll do is I'll make some sleeves to bridge this gap here and this ledge here so it's level. And what that will do is, when we clamp the head on, the forces will, when the wheel string pushes on a liner, all the load will be transferred down the outside of the aluminium to this level here. But because it'll be an aluminium, this tunnel I'm going to make, it'll be the same expansion rate, so everything will grow together. And then we'll put a plate on top, bore through it, and then we'll put a nice top hat liner in. And I know that this works because this is what I've done on all my engines in the past, and it supports the liner perfectly. People panic about the liner not being able to lose its heat, and the piston overheating, and that was a problem years ago, hence the wet liner, where the liner was in contact with the water. But with the modern glues we've got, we can use the glues on the outside of the iron liner, the skin liner, to transfer the heat into the parent liner and then into the water jacket. It'll be no problem, it'll work absolutely superbly. I'm really confident of that, obviously only because it's all been done before. So we'll just turn our attentions, that's the plan with the block, but that's for me to do when it comes back from having its dry slump system made. Now, going back to the piston, this is the pistons that have been partially made, and they're JE, little slippers, very nice, very pretty, a little bit on the heavy side. We'll probably lose some of that intrusion because the chamber shape is much different. It's a shallow chamber on the posh downdraft head that we've got for this engine. And as you'll notice, it's got no valve cutouts, but the important thing is it has got the material in there for the valve cutouts. So that's perfect for us, because we can put the cutouts where we want to put them in the perfect place to suit our different angled head with the way the valves come in. Now, I would like to use these liners because they're nice, but this is just a pet hate of mine. They've been made and honed to size. So that will actually go in there, if I shape myself. And the reason I don't like it is I always like to bore a liner once it's in the block, because when it's in the block and it's set and it's in its pre-stressed state, when we bore it, I know the hole is going to stay perfectly round. And what I'm hoping here is that if we're going to run like 4th thou clearance, there's going to be enough material in this to get a light hone out of it. So what I've done is I've just popped a ring into here, and I thought we'll do a bit of a reading on the sheet. So we've got the sheet here from JE Pistons, and just so you can see, I'll just zoom in. It's saying, so we've got different ring gaps for each ring, and then we've got different applications. So we're just going to go with the high performance street or strip. So it's what it's saying is minimum gap per inch of bore. So we're on a 74mm piston, so we'll call that 75, that's 3 inches. So it's 3 times 4.5 thou, so that's 0.045. So 4,510. So I need to use a calculator, that's embarrassing, isn't it? 4.5 thou times 3 is 13.5 thou. So we're looking for a clearance, a minimum clearance when it's brand new, of 13.5 thou ring gap. And I've just set this up with a 13. Let's see how he feels. Oh, it's a little bit tight on 13. It started to go in. So I'm imagining these rings have been gapped in a proper laboratory, like, you know, to run with this piston in the gap in the 4th thou clearance. It runs piston to skirt. So I think we might be able to get away with a light home before we would go oversized on the ring gap. I'd be quite happy to run up to sort of 16 thou ring gap as a new engine, because it's going to be doing some RPM, and we're not too stressed about oil consumption and things like that, because it's a racer. But what I'll say is, just in case you're wondering why we have a ring gap, the reason is if you were to straighten this piece of metal out, so it's a big long strip of metal, and then put a blowtorch on it, can you imagine the linear expansion? And that's why we have the gap. So as the piston gets hot, as it gets hot, it'll expand, and that 13th hour we start with will end up closing right down. Now, if you start with a tight ring gap, say if we didn't gap these rings and the bore was tight and the ring gap was like 5 thou or something, what would happen is the first time you put the engine under any real graft or load, the ring would butt up because it expand and no gap, and when it butts up, it starts to scuff. And in the worst case, we get a situation where the heat buildup is so much from the scuffing that it ends up taking the ring out and damaging the piston and marking the bore, etc. So yeah, we'll just have to be really careful with things like that. Now, moving on again. Right, chaps, this is the bit I've been saving myself for. I've been itching to do it for a while now, just build it up to get a bit of a visual, because I've not really seen the new block with the new deep angle head and the very posh dual stage injection manifold on it, and I've got to say, it looks fast. I think it's going to be really good, and yeah, very exciting times for me. So I'm going to box all this up now, get it all posted away, and then it will be a little while before we revisit it, but hopefully before Christmas we'll get the block, start machining the block for the liners, etc., and we'll go through that together. Thanks for watching and tuning in again, much appreciated, and thanks again to the subscribers. Got another 20 odd this week, so that's great. I will look forward to speaking to you next week. Bye for now.